Well, hi there, everybody. Welcome to the webinar and how to maximize the benefits of your E3 platform and what you can do relative to governance on E3. My name is John Mancini, and I'm with Infotechtion, and I have some fabulous colleagues here, Vivek Bhatt and Kunal Kankaria, and we'll get started in just a minute. But before doing so, just wanted to go through a couple of the logistics things for today. First of all, you'll note on your console that you can control a lot of different variables, including the size of the screen and that kind of thing. So feel free to have at it. Secondly, we'll be recording this. So if any of the issues that we raise strike an interest with you and you want to share this after the fact with your colleagues, you'll be getting a link to do that, and we would encourage you to do that. Thirdly, there is a tab to ask questions, and we would like to encourage you to do that. Make sure that you take advantage of that opportunity. We've got two really knowledgeable people here today. And thirdly, check out the download tab. You'll find some really interesting materials there that I think will be helpful in your journey to maximizing the benefit of your E3 platform. And we're particularly fond of the new compliance ebook that's listed there. So make sure that you take a look at that, download that. And then lastly, before we get started here, you'll see that we have our webcams on. So at least from the waist up, we're all clothed suitably and in typical sort of COVID fashion these days. If at any point bandwidth gets a little tempestuous for any of us, we'll shut off our webcam to maximize the audio, but don't get alarmed if that happens. You never can tell these days what might happen bandwidth-wise. So let's get started, and if you could hit the next slide, please, Vivek. So we're going to talk a little bit about information management in Microsoft 365 today, and these are some of the topics that we're going to talk about. As I said, my colleagues Vivek and Kunal will introduce themselves briefly at the start of their section, so that I won't go through the normal kind of thing where I say where they were born and what grammar school they went to and all of those things that are usually part of any kind of a webinar introduction. I'll just allow them quickly to give their professional credentials at the beginning of their session. On my side, I have spent probably more time in the governance arena than is any sane person should really do. I was the president of AIM for 22, 23 years, and prior to that worked for another major technology association. And so I've been in the association business with regards to technology for a long time. My connection with Infotechtion is fairly recent. I still do some work for AIM, and particularly we're going to be releasing an M365 paper in the next couple of weeks. You might keep an eye out for that. But I spend a good portion of my time working with the Infotechtion people, and have been particularly impressed with what they've been able to do relative to governance and Microsoft 365. Next slide, please. So the thing you ought to know about Infotechtion, this is a rather elaborate slide that talks about the approach that we take to thinking about the question of governance. And the major takeaways on this slide are to look at those three lines in the middle there: strategy, architecture, and solutions. And so we're firmly of the belief that you start with strategy, that you really get that piece nailed down very, very accurately and very deliberately at the beginning of a project, that then architecture becomes an important ingredient in terms of guiding your ability to ultimately automate what you're trying to do with your solution. And then that gets into the solution side, which is that organizations need to think very, very creatively right now, particularly as budgets are tight, as they think about how they maximize and leverage their platforms. And so that very deliberate idea of going from strategy to architecture to solutions is a part of how Infotechtion approaches all of the engagements that we're involved in. We're Microsoft partners. We've been pathfinders for Microsoft. Most of our clients are fairly large-scale organizations and focused specifically on the strategy side of getting your governance capabilities right. Next slide, please. So what I thought I would do just to kick this thing off is that talk a little bit, as I mentioned, I've been doing this for longer than is a sane person would, just some lessons that I've learned along the way in terms of both governance projects that have worked and ones that have not worked, and use that as a framework maybe to think a little bit about our conversation with regards to E3 today. So like I say, I've been doing this a long time, and when I look at what people have aired on in the past, a lot of the lessons learned center around these three. First of all, you need to make sure that you incorporate two very different perspectives. And usually organizations have strong cards in either one or the other, but you really need to figure out a way to harness both sets of disciplines, both the business strategy discipline as well as the technical knowledge necessary to execute against the business strategy. And you can't go with just one or the other. You really need either with your staff or with augmenting staff with external resources to figure out how you bring to bear both of those resources to a governance project. Second lesson, and this is there's a lot of different ways that people have talked about this. It's boiling the ocean, it's all sorts of different things, Big Bang. But basically it centers around the fact that organizations frequently try to do too much, too soon, too big. And when they go approach that, they wind up just paralyzed ultimately. So you really need to think about how you're going to go about the tactics of implementing the strategy that you've put into place, and resist the temptation to try to change everything all at once. But that doesn't mean that you don't need to have a strategy, because if you just go about willy-nilly adopting different governance projects in different arenas, you're going to wind up pretty frustrated because they won't cumulatively add up to anything significant. And then the last thing, and this gets really into thinking about the topic for today, is your long-term objective is not to have a lot of custom projects that will create all sorts of challenges as you migrate content to the cloud, but to create a platform that will automate governance. And as I said earlier, our thought is that you really start with architecture as the key lever to drive automation. And so you really need to think about this in terms of that old saying of, what we're trying to do is not teach people, not fish for people, but teach them how to fish. And that's how Infotechtion approaches our engagements, is to think about how can we help organizations think about this question of governance? How can we get them to leverage the native platforms as aggressively as they possibly can themselves, and to enable them to do it themselves and do so in an incremental fashion that follows the natural rhythms of the business. So without further ado, we will spend our time today talking about how Microsoft Governance E3 fits into those lessons and fits into that equation. I would, again, remind you along the way to feel free to ask questions, feel free to download the content that's listed in the download area, and let me turn it over to Vivek.
Thank you, John. Can I just check if you can hear me fine? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. I'm Vivek, and I lead the technology team within Infotechtion. And my experience has been in Microsoft, and the last decade has been Microsoft Information Governance, working with customers and Microsoft Engineering as design partners. In today's session, I will cover three topics, and John mentioned it: architecture as a foundation. You'll hear that a lot from us today, and we will emphasize on how your information governance principles and the architectural foundation will set the core base for information governance within your organization. So as John kind of covered in his part of the section and his opening statement about relevance of information governance, and I wanted to start the discussion by saying that in my opinion, we are at a key point and going through a once-in-a-generation change in how we do business with everything that's happening with COVID, remote working, and digital transformation, which organizations have gone through. And this obviously creates a lot of challenges, but also creates a unique opportunity to integrate information management, best practices, behaviors into the new operating model which organizations will be moving into or transitioning into because of this change. And so it's very important that if we act now, we can also leverage the ongoing digital transformation and really develop a high level of engagement and awareness about information management, which is really important. And I feel that it's a unique opportunity right now. And we can really build on this to ensure the embedding of good IM behaviors, information management behaviors, drive better organization, accessibility, and usage of information across the whole enterprise, and really position us to face the complexities of an evolving and changing global landscape. So we've talked about why. In this session, we will talk about information which is managed in Microsoft 365, and when it comes to how, we will understand what IAM practices and behaviors that we should consider as part of formulating that information governance strategy, and as John mentioned, the architecture as a foundation for future automations. Moving on to the next slide, I wanted to kind of set the tone for this session by starting with the scope for information governance versus records management. And so overall, if we look at governance, is one of the building blocks applied across the information lifecycle. Every organization is unique in their way of working, and there are many different ways in which the business processes will flow through your information lifecycle, but the building blocks remain the same. And combined with information governance principles, really form the foundations for the maturing of information management practices and behaviors in future. So today's session, we're going to cover the biggest circle in this presentation, which is information governance. We've talked a lot about records management, but we will try and focus on the wider topics today and not the records management. And one thing I would also like to say is that by focusing on information governance, we are really maturing our foundation, and we ensure the right information is retained and available for the business to both extract better value from and also use it to support an agile and customer-centric organization. And finally, I just want to use this slide to also highlight the difference in the purpose of information governance versus records management, and that is quite pertinent in context of how the licenses are split within Microsoft 365 ecosystem. And information governance, as you see here, is really the base for you to do advanced things. So you cannot demonstrate compliant records management without a robust information governance foundation. So that really is the key. And there is a lot can already be achieved in meeting your IAM compliance objectives with the information governance scope and how it relates to Microsoft licensing. Moving on, let's have a look at the core principles which are important in order to establish an information governance strategy. And I start with the vision, which requires a clear understanding of objectives, your priorities, and commitments. And with that vision, the organizations are really moving towards an IG and information management practices are really moving towards keeping customer and end user first. So in the previous slide, John mentioned about bringing that balance between IT and business. Is really about putting customer first and customer at the focus of it. Ensure that the business and end users is central to the information governance design. I will say this in the session in the later session as well, but information governance architecture is not an IT architecture. IT architecture absolutely provides input to it, is the foundation to it, but it really is a combination of IT architecture and a business architecture. And so having customers and end user as a focus allows us to embed certain behaviors. I'll take an example like health and safety is important to every organization. It's part of an organization's DNA, especially organizations operating at scale. You don't make any exceptions. Information governance is really in the same category. It really is part of the company DNA and second nature to people's habits. We're not there yet, but that's the ambition and that's the vision, to really have information governance, IAM best practices and behaviors, part of people's information behaviors. The next core principle is about ownership and accountability, which is one of the key pillars for an information governance strategy. And the idea behind actually showing these key core principles is that we will transition in this session from principles to how these principles relate to each other and convert into a strategy, and then how do you derive an architecture or an architectural foundation eventually. So having a clear ownership, accountability, and authenticity of information is really key to ensuring that we are enabling our customers and our end users to find the right information reliably and actually make informed decisions. Keeping all of this complexity behind the scenes and really providing a simple design and simple solution for end users to understand, providing increased clarity with simple designs, ability to navigate and find information consistently with standard approaches. And that really is important and essential for guaranteeing the reliability of information and its transparent management. Consistency and standardization forms really the key principle on which we build a secure, protected, and discoverable architecture for information. And we will look at later on which components within E3 licensing help you achieve that. And finally, from a sustainability point of view, the outcome of these core principles is really looking at long-term planning mindset and in partnership with your IT partners, legal, and business. And by long-term planning mindset, I am not inferring to having big bang multi-year programs, but really is to kind of look at what is your minimum viable product, but overall, how will you over time improve the maturity and lift the maturity of information governance within your organization. In the next slide, I will talk directly to the possibilities of achieving an architectural foundation and more with your current Microsoft 365 licenses. Okay, on this slide, I want to start with some of the key components that I have listed here, which are essential and must be part of your architectural foundation and absolutely within the scope of Microsoft E3 license. And I've intentionally not put any Microsoft product descriptions here, which we will come to in the next slide, because we really want to build a layer of information architecture which is not tied to technology, which is technology agnostic. And of course, we are talking in context of Microsoft 365, but you're not building a governance strategy or a governance architecture for Microsoft 365. You're building a governance architecture and governance strategy for your organization and for all information, which increasingly is in Microsoft 365, but is also in other places too. So I want to start with information architecture. It really ensures that you have a standard approach to structure your information. And what I mean by that is how your collaborative spaces, and with that I mean site collections, SharePoint site collections, Teams collections, and other collaborative spaces are created, provisioned, and configured to maximize teamwork, and how people use those structures to create information, use information, share information sets, really sets the foundation for future improvements. If you haven't got that right, if you haven't got your structure standardized, a standard mechanism through which you are enabling and empowering your users to create those structures, then it could lead to future retrospective corrections. And the price for doing that is that by an architectural foundation and having a robust information architecture and how collaborative spaces are created, or even personal spaces are created, you are instilling confidence in use of information and effective decision-making by the business. The next point is information enrichment. And part of establishing that good architecture foundation is really enriching your information with useful data about the information. And in context of Microsoft 365, metadata plays a key role. It's really an investment in the future findability of information. The more you invest time in developing the information, the more important it is to ensure you and your colleagues can find and reuse the information. So in my mind, you really need, therefore, a standardized set of metadata to manage unstructured information. That's the challenge that we face with unstructured information quite often, which is not there with business applications or structured applications, because there is a database, there is a structure, there is a defined perimeter. But that doesn't exist in context of documents, and especially with emails. So having a standard enterprise metadata, having that metadata tied to your existing structures and your templates really sets the right tone and the right balance in how you provide some definition to your information. And once your information is enriched with metadata, the key information is populated either as content or metadata. You can then leverage things like Microsoft Search, which is also available part of the E3 license. You can show metadata as filters when users search for information, making it easier through filtered navigation, search filters to find, navigate, and sort information based on a few examples like business area, process area, country, retention label, sensitivity, etc. And that brings me to the next point, is about the use of sharing and protection. It's one of the key components, one of the key risks organizations have highlighted across my projects and also other discussions, is as the adoption of Teams and SharePoint increases, there's a growing concern regarding inability to control how information is shared, what kind of information is managed in which collaborative space is increasingly becoming challenging. And I always take that discussion back to the architecture. It really is where the answer is. We can talk about sensitivity labels and sensitive information types in Microsoft 365, which we will touch upon briefly later on. But really is about integrating those capabilities with your information architecture, with your metadata, and then based on that, we can then enable users to use sensitivity labels. We can do a sensitive information type analysis on those information and apply certain controls on it. That integration, not on its own, but integrated with the other two components, not only protects information when it is in Microsoft 365, but really enables you to protect it when it is outside too. So protection really stays with the file where it goes. Extends that to data privacy and compliance as well. We'll talk about a number of, a few components which are available in E3 license to manage that. And then the final two, retention management and e-discovery. Retention management is one of the key, but perhaps the most overlooked architectural facet, which can really solve a wide range of compliance issues. And to get started with it, you don't need an E5 license. Many organizations are adopting organizational-wide policies to keep information that they want to keep, but delete the information that they don't want to keep. And it's the challenge always with deleting the information that you don't want to keep, and that requires a significant behavior shift to know your information, which I talked about in the previous sections. If you don't architect, don't organize your information, then it's harder to understand where the information is. And that becomes a significant blocker in any automation decision that you want to take at an enterprise level within your organization. So my final comment is on legal discovery. And so really is legal discovery doesn't sit on its own. It really is supported by architecture, metadata, how people share information, where information is stored, is to really support and then optimize your legal discovery preservation and hold capabilities. So Microsoft 365 standard e-discovery capability is sufficient for you to implement a minimum viable product for information governance and start delivering compliance objectives. But really, as you can't do it in isolation, you've got to combine it with the overall picture of architecture, metadata, protection, privacy compliance, and automating retention management. Let's have a look at how this translates into an enterprise architecture for governance. Okay, moving on to the next slide then. This is a very simplified view of the key architectural components you must invest in as part of your governance strategy, and importantly in Microsoft 365 as well. Architecture is vital to strategic IG in several ways. It can improve information findability and understanding for your staff and your customers. It can enable improved e-discovery, and for the public sector, things like FOIA responses, etc. And it can really facilitate data privacy, protection, and compliance. Not only it can address your compliance challenges, but also enable people and technology to do things like capture, present, preserve, organize, and manage information assets to fulfill their missions. What we see on this picture is multiple layers of architecture that we really need to look at, starting with the overall the tenant configuration in Microsoft 365. I'll just touch upon one specific point. Things like privileged identity management. I've seen several instances where organizations still haven't activated things like multi-factor authentication or privileged identity management to really ensure that people who are in control of the tenant and managing the tenant and have access to the tenant administration capabilities are done in a manner that you can defend those activities. We are increasingly working from home. Mobile device management, the policies related to mobile device management and accessing the sharing and access management policies are important to your organization. But once the tenant level configuration is done, we really find ourselves in the space where the tenant is configured, but we don't have any governance for our users or very limited governance for users in order to guide them on the best way to use the capabilities which are available. So really think about how to invest in site provisioning or Teams provisioning, how you can connect that site provisioning mechanism with managed metadata, retention labels, and then start to embed some of the more advanced capabilities such as sensitivity labels, DLP, and legal discovery. I've highlighted separately here some of the advanced features which are available as part of a separate add-on within Microsoft, so we will not talk about them, but it's worth highlighting that in order to complete that compliance record immutability picture, those are the advanced capabilities which are required. But the point we're trying to make here today is that you've got to get through all of those above capabilities and make sure that you have in place before you start looking at some of the advanced features. So what's the best way to check your architecture score, if I may, against these best practices? And through that, we want to introduce one of the many Microsoft tools and accelerators that we have been involved in as design partners. I wanted to introduce as the last slide in my section is the Microsoft Compliance Analyzer. It's a new product which automatically assesses your tenant configuration against the governance best practices. The assessment is kind of baselined against your geographical location of your tenant. And this is really a great tool. And I'm quite excited about this because it enables us as partners and also you as a customer to really not think about which policies and which compliance regulations you need to configure your tenant against. The tool actually itself extracts your geographical location. Based on that, it has predefined connectors to the regulations which are applicable in the geographical area. And then based on that, it provides you recommendations on the overall governance. So it not only just tells you which of the Microsoft features that you need to switch on in order to increase your compliance score, but it also tells you what kind of policies, what kind of retention labels that you can create in order to get started with your governance journey. So just a quick summary on this. The compliance analyzer reviews your current configurations. It automatically views your tenant configuration and tells you where you need to make adjustment, reflecting back on the architecture diagram that I showed you, whether you have multi-factor authentication enabled or not, whether you have certain, whether you have created any retention policies or not. And it actually calls out actions that you need to perform customized to your geographical location, and then provides you recommendations on how you can automate certain activation capabilities, things like creating policies, creating retention labels, opening up e-discovery capabilities, for example.
Great.
So on that,
I had a couple of questions that popped up, Vivek. I was wondering if you would mind answering them before we switch off to Kunal.
Sure.
First question, and this was one from me. I just you could refresh my memory a bit. The compliance analyzer. My memory is that this is an open source tool. Do I have that right?
It is an open source tool. Yes.
And why don't you tell people a little bit about what that means, why that's important?
So yeah, it's actually a good question. The fact that it is an open source tool, it's developed by Microsoft, it's available for everyone to use with an open source license. So you're not actually paying any license fee for it. And also because it is an open source tool, it enables us and you to actually tailor it to your needs. So Microsoft provide this as a basic capability that you can develop with your IT partners and add more customization to it. And so kind of you have the ability to tailor it without violating any licensing implications.
And one other question, and then I'll turn it back to you, is and it probably relates to the compliance analyzer as well as some other things, but a question that said, is there a way, or is there advice, is there a tool, is there a roadmap that can be used for organizations that are new to this to get started? What would be your advice there?
So we will absolutely. So we have kind of developed an information governance maturity model, which is based on the industry standards, and so that definitely is the first thing that we would look to do, is to kind of baseline what your current maturity is, and that's not based on how many licenses you have. That's really based on what your ways of working are, what your IAM practices are, where you are against your current vision. But as part of that, we also run some of these tools, for example, Microsoft Compliance Analyzer and Microsoft Compliance Assessment tools, to really understand not just the ways of working, but the current state of compliance within your organization from regulation point of view, in terms of how the information sharing, how the policy network, and how the information is structured, to kind of just give you a holistic view on where you are right now. And that kind of gives you a nice benchmark to then create a target state for your organization.
Great, thank you.
So final summary before I hand over to Kunal is most of the governance architecture work must be done upfront. It's not something that we would, or anybody would recommend you to do in retrospect. And you really need a plan to maintain and improve this over time. So it's not, do it once and then forget about it. It really is a continuous improvement. But having some of those core components within your architectural foundation and your governance strategy, you really are setting yourself up for more automation in future. So when people can find the information they need, when they can collaborate effectively, and when content and data is preserved appropriately, and really when your information assets are securely managed, you can be sure that your governance investments is well worth the investment that you have made right now. So on that note, I am going to say thank you and hand over to Kunal for the next set of slides.
Thank you, Vivek. That was indeed insightful. John, a quick mic check. Can you hear me fine? Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Kunal Kankaria, Principal Solutions Architect at Infotechtion. I am also a Microsoft certified trainer, and I have roughly about 12 years of experience, starting with SPS 2003 all the way to Microsoft 365 now. Most of the work that I do is around architecture and adoption of Microsoft 365 solutions at Infotechtion. Okay, so in this half of the session, I'll be talking about the first steps you should consider when you plan to automate information governance based on the core architectural concepts that Vivek just talked about. The real key takeaway from my session will be about automating your sites or teams provisioning process. All this with the embedded richness of your information governance model. I'll also talk about how Infotechtion has achieved all of this for Microsoft Teams using open source tooling and within the ambit of the E3 licensing. So let's dive right into it. Okay, perhaps the most important part of information governance is the use of site or teams templates. These templates define the structure of your site or team. Consider it as a sketch of the site or team that tells you what components will be included when the template is deployed. For SharePoint site, it means that you can define artifacts like the site content types, site column, navigation, list, and libraries, which get created each time a site gets provisioned using the template. For teams, it means that we can define the channel that gets created, the default apps that will be added to the teams when the template is deployed. Templates form one of the fundamental aspects to implement an information architecture in Microsoft 365 that you would have already defined based on what Vivek talked about earlier. So this is more or less how you automate your information strategy and architecture that you already have in place. Next slide, Vivek. Okay, broadly, there are three kinds of templates that are present. Out of the box templates are the ones that come with the product when it's installed for the users in your tenant. For instance, SharePoint comes with various site templates like the modern team sites or communication sites, both of which serve different purpose and deploy different libraries, lists, and web paths, for instance. In case of teams, there are out of the box templates like onboard employees template that aims at streamlining employee onboarding or manage an event which sets you up with the necessary apps by default. All these templates come with predefined channels and apps out of the box. Then the second type of templates are the SharePoint experience templates, which are based on varied business solutions. These are also called as the lookbook templates provided by Microsoft. You can use these templates for creating modern experiences for solutions like crisis communication, in intranets with zero customization. At Infotechtion, we have built an intranet solution taking inspiration from the lookbook templates and extended it with all the necessary information architecture components in place. And coming to the most important one, which is kind of more relevant to what we're talking about now, are the custom templates that provide you with the complete control to define which components of site or teams get provisioned. For instance, using the SharePoint site templates, you can define your own content types, site columns, navigation, and so on, which form the basis of your information architecture. You can also create standardized custom templates at the organizational level, or even you can even create templates at the business unit level, right? That can inherit components from your organizational level template. So there is a whole lot that you can do with templates and standardize your whole information governance architecture. Okay, next slide, Vivek. So why are templates the go-to path for information governance in SharePoint and Teams? First off, templates provide a mechanism by which you can standardize your metadata model and the information architecture across all the sites or teams that get provisions based on the template. This also provides a way for you to ensure that you achieve compliance by design, meaning there are no functional silos. All the business units talk in a similar structured fashion, improving interoperability, which ultimately leads to the circulation of organizational vision and knowledge. Site templates provide consistency in the way that information will be obtained from end users is stored, right? and that results in ease of access, better search, and filtering of information. Um, so you can also define security requirements of your SharePoint site as a part of the template. For instance, let's consider that for each site that gets provisioned using the template, it should probably have a highly confidential library, right? And it needs to have its permission broken such that only the site owner should have access to the library. Templates make all such scenarios possible. So and then you get better access control. If you're looking to build SharePoint sites or create teams for specific types of projects, then templates are the best fit for the job. Most of the organizations carry out projects that are repeatable and similar in nature. Templates are a great way to standardize such project sites. The deployment of sites, getting them up and running is faster with templates. Templates also provide a mechanism by which you can achieve uniform look and feel, a consistent branding that can be tailored to your organization's branding guidelines. Templates are also maintainable and makes it easy to enhance the site or teams with additional features. And as you progress along your information architecture and the information governance journey, you can really modify these templates to suit your requirements. Yeah, next slide, Vivek. So now that we've talked about templates and why should you use them, let's look at how you can actually get them deployed to your tenant. Out of the box templates like team sites, communication sites for SharePoint, or employee onboarding and help desk for Teams can be provisioned using the user interface or programmatically. They are standard and ready to use templates built right into the product. They form the basis for defining custom templates as well. The next ones are the SharePoint experience templates, like the crisis communication template. These have been open sourced by Microsoft. They are available via the Lookbook Microsoft site. They are easy to set up as the whole deployment is a single click process. You can deploy to the tenant of your choosing, and within a few minutes, you will have the site with all the necessary artifacts deployed to your tenant. They're a great way to get inspiration to start designing the template that you deem fit for your organization. And custom templates, they can be provisioned programmatically for both SharePoint and Teams. The Teams admin center also allows us to create templates using the user interface, and one can define the channels and apps that need to be provisioned right from the Teams admin center. So that's one added advantage. Yeah. Next slide, Vivek. Okay, so we have talked about templates, and what we want to do is to combine templates with a robust provisioning framework. And why should you do that? Because both of them combined will give you a good governance model. While templates allow you to standardize the structure, navigation, look and feel, and all the other elements of your site or teams, a good provisioning framework will assist you in capturing metadata during the provisioning process. This metadata can then form the basis on which you apply, say, automated retention settings, automated information policies, and so on. For instance, say you might want to apply a confidential label to all the sites that belong to the finance business unit, or you want to retain the information in a HR site for say 10 years. All such stuff can be automated during provisioning. The provisioning framework will even allow you to embed approvals before a site or team is actually provisioned. This helps you manage the proliferation of sites or teams in your environment. Another advantage of having a robust provisioning framework is that it allows you to apply templates to SharePoint sites that were created due to the creation of teams. We have often seen now that how teams is causing a sprawl in the background because SharePoint sites get created automatically, and all the other artifacts that get provisioned due to the creation of teams. And embedding information governance or that is possible using templates and provisioning framework that you can apply the template in the background, and all this results in a better governance model to manage the life cycle of a site of team right from creation to archival. Okay, next slide, Vivek. Okay, let us now have a look at Teams Hub, which is an open source product from Infotechtion, built on Microsoft Power Platform to accelerate governance deployment and ongoing operational governance in Microsoft 365. The key is to focus on making it easy for users to integrate sufficient guidance and governance to maintain long-term team effectiveness. With Teams Hub, you can automate manual tasks involved in the creation of and setup of teams with seamless access to create and request new teams. This enables enterprises to assess the requirements and automatically apply naming, security, taxonomy, and compliance controls when a new team is created. You can also enhance the experience by using predefined templates for a seamless experience leveraging existing Microsoft 365 features. And remember, all this with E3 licensing. Teams Hub features a learning zone to provide tailored learning experience for the entire organization. It provides integrated user guidance and training videos directly into Microsoft Teams. We all know how rapidly Microsoft Team evolves. So you also receive automatic quarterly updates on Teams learning content and videos directly from Microsoft. This is delivered via a solution called as Microsoft Learning Pathways, which was developed by Microsoft. With the ability to choose the template before creation of teams and the ability to decide the archival mechanism based on the metadata during provisioning, you also get embedded in governance features. Teams Hub provides a single interface to extract key insights about teams and associated compliance for your compliance and governance stakeholders. Teams Hub leverages the existing analytics provided by Microsoft and an open platform to surface additional insights as defined by your information governance standards. External sharing can also be set up based on your preference during provisioning. Teams Hub provides you with the ability to switch guest access based on your team's requirements. And Teams Hub also comes with a centralized knowledge about which, for instance, if I just say want to publish tips and tricks about how to use Teams to all the people in my organization, all that is embedded within Teams Hub, and you can leverage that. Okay, that kind of concludes my session. I'll hand over to John for questions and the final call to action for today's session. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kunal. Yes, we have some questions here. So let me start with you. This was a question with regards to the templates, and the question, again, somebody wanting to make sure, is this standard in 365? Is this included in E3? Is this extra? Give a little detail on that.
Okay, so I broadly talked about 3 templates, right? So the standard templates, they are built into the product. So if you have SharePoint and if you have Teams, you already have those templates in your organization. When you go ahead and create a new SharePoint site, it asks you whether you want a modern team site, a modern communication site. And similarly, when you go to create a team site, it asks you what kind of team you want, whether you want a blank team that starts from scratch, or you want something like a help desk, right, which automatically gives you all the channels that are relevant for that solution. And final ones are the custom templates, right, and that is where it takes a bit of customization, and you need to probably do changes programmatically so that it fits your organization. So for instance, if I wanted custom metadata to be included in my provisioning process, I would have to use custom templates, and that would require me to do some coding and some sort of programmatic changes so that we can automate that stuff. So yeah, and yes, E3 licensing works with all of these 3. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question, somebody was just wanted a little bit more detail. The Teams Hub that you talked about, is that an Infotechtion product? Is that what they wanted? What is that? I think they were interested.
Okay, so what we have done is we have taken an open source product from Microsoft, which is a Teams app template, right? And that's a requested Teams app template. And that comes with very basic provisioning features for Microsoft Teams. What we have done at Infotechtion is taken that, automated a lot of information governance stuff into that particular solution, and really made it a seamless experience. Now that particular solution from Microsoft does not come with all the other features like the learning hub and the knowledge center that we have, and the analytics that we talked about. Infotechtion has embedded all of that, right? Yeah.
So that's an Infotechtion specific conversation in that builds on the E3 capability.
Absolutely.
Yes, and just to add to that, it doesn't require any additional licensing. It still remains an open source tool. So the modifications that we have made on top, we are also planning to make them open source and actually deploy them back so that people can benefit from it. And I think where we are interested in is where customers or organizations need help. We can help you with integrating and deploying that solution. But from a licensing point of view, it works with your E3 license, and there is no additional licensing required for Teams Hub.
Yep.
Interesting. And if folks have are curious about that, just send me a email offline at john.m@infotechtion.com, and I'd be happy to get you more detail. Another question. This one, let's see. I'll throw it up to both of you guys. With retention labels, are we to align with content types like it was in previous versions of SharePoint via information management policies, or how do you align content types and labels?
So the content type and retention labels are two different concepts. They are not the same as information management policy. However, there is a method through which they can be combined, and it's called auto classification. So by using auto classification, you can automatically apply retention labels to any information which has a particular content type, but architecturally they are two different components and not combined into one.
Great, thank you. Next question. This is one that I get a lot. We didn't deploy Office 365 with governance initially. How hard is it to do it after the fact, and what's a good strategy to start down this path if we neglected it the first time? A lot of folks also experiencing this with Teams right now in terms of the Teams explosion.
I think, well, this is a very common example that we have also seen with other customers as well, and we always say that, you know, start with the information governance now, and before we start embedding information governance to existing teams, we really want to, you know, stop the lake from growing. And so our recommendation would be to apply information governance first to any newly created team, so that going forward, every new team, every new SharePoint site collection has information governance, and then start an activity of work to look at retrospectively every single team that has been created so far, and you will need to invest in actually embedding it. But with some of the automation that we have talked about, if the go forward situation is controlled, then it really is a capability that you can really automate some of those decisions actually applied to existing team site collections. So previously we would have talked about a 6-month project to do it. Now we are talking about a 2-month project where you would be able to not only look at go forward information governance, but also retrospectively application to it.
How about the question? There's a question here about data migration from existing records management and document management systems into 365. Who wants to take that?
Overall, I think before you start bringing information in Microsoft 365, you really need to look at some of the things that we've just mentioned about having information governance, having an architectural foundation in place. You really don't want to bring content into Microsoft 365 when it is not governed. And once you have that, then really recommend reviewing your migration approach and making sure that the application of governance, retention capabilities, legal hold management, deletion of information that you no longer need is baked into your migration approach.
Great, okay, and we have a couple more here. Let's see, just one more. Auto class is an E5 item, and the question, everybody looking at money these days, can this be done? Can you buy an E5 license for the records administration, or does everybody have to have an E5 license?
Yeah, that's a very common question. So Microsoft's positioning is very clear on licensing. You for E5 capabilities, and yes, auto classification is E5. Any user who is going to access the information where auto classification has been applied must be E5 licensed. So if you have one record administrator and 10 users, but only 5 users are going to access the library where you're going to apply auto classification, then the record manager and the 5 users need to be licensed.
Great, and then one last question here about Microsoft Graph And is there any advantage to using Microsoft Graph to increase the visibility of current status and maturity level?
Absolutely. Microsoft Graph is the foundation for everything, every automation that we have talked about. It's all baked into Microsoft Graph, and Microsoft Graph makes it happen. And it really is a very, very neat way of actually not only just looking at SharePoint or Teams, it brings all information together across every single component of Microsoft 365. We can share more details with you about how some of the automation solutions that we have developed leveraging Microsoft Graph API, not only these governance solutions, but also reporting capabilities, which are quite effective when you use Microsoft Graph.
And somebody pointed out, which is, I had forgotten about this, that there's different E5 levels. I was kind of treating it as a little bit of a monolith. Maybe talk a little bit about that, the different layers of E5.
Yeah, actually, so the E5 is the Uber license, which includes a whole host of things, and then Microsoft has created different components of E5. So, for example, if you're interested in records management, advanced e-discovery, those type of capabilities, then you really don't have to buy the E5 license. You really can buy the E5 information governance add-on license. So, and the best way to actually check it is contact your Microsoft account manager or even your tenant team, who will have access to all of these add-on licenses available directly within your Microsoft tenant administration, and they can give you all the various possible combinations that are available in the tenant for you to buy.
So I'd like to thank Vivek and Kunal. Thank you for being here today. Thank the audience for being here. It's been a really interesting conversation. Again, before we depart, if you haven't downloaded some of the materials, go ahead and do that. You can also get it at infotechtion.com. You might want to check that out, and please feel free to contact us if we can help with your individual circumstances and individual questions that you might have that maybe you preferred to answer more privately. So what I would like to do to close is ask each of you to give kind of one salient point that you want to make sure that people, walk away from and don't forget. So Kunal, why don't you start?
Okay. Okay. That's okay. One key takeaway for me probably would be that while technology is an enabler to automate information governance, never start with technology-enabled automation as the first step without having an information governance strategy and architecture in place. Else, you will find yourself in a loop of getting the automation right, and you're trying to fix a right problem at a wrong place. So yeah, that's my key takeaway.
Great. Vivek?
I was going to use actually architecture, but I think a lot of people talked about information maturity and how to improve maturity. I think really is really important for organizations to kind of, before you start your journey, to really understand and baseline where you are and where you want to be. And it really is a really good, there are really good tools available to actually just baseline your current maturity level overall from an information governance point of view. That gives you a really good view on where you are, how you compare against the rest of the market, companies of the same size, and kind of gives you the aspiration and creates a high level vision for you to kind of where you want to be in 3 years time, in 5 years times, and in 10 years time. So I would really recommend that, to kind of really look at your information governance, information management practices and maturity levels.
The thing I'd like to leave everyone with, and is before we close, is this. I love the concept, just 3 words, of minimal viable product, and kind of this idea that there's a long legacy in the content management area of designing these like great big gigantic spaceships that never get off the ground. And when you look at both the E3 and E5 capabilities, it's a lot of capabilities. And so what you want to do is start with the minimal viable product that's necessary to achieve your business needs, but at the same time have the ability to scale up over time. And I think that combination is really, I think, very important to think about as you try to figure out how you make sense of all this in an era that's really characterized by very, very rapidly changing technology and innovation, both on the Microsoft platform and in the technology world at large. So thank you all again very much. We really do appreciate the time. Don't hesitate to contact us if we can be of help. And on behalf of Kunal and Vivek, thank you, and signing off.
Thank you very much.